What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be comparing the new Google Pixel 4a to the 2020 iPhone SE. Now, I think this is actually a really interesting comparison because basically what we have here are the two budget offerings from the respective companies, and both of these phones have received a lot of attention this year because in a world of $1,000 smartphones, these devices sort of break the mold. In a lot of ways, they're similar. They're smaller, inexpensive devices that maybe lack some of the fancy stuff that flagship phones have, but the things the devices do offer, they do really well. At the same time, these phones are going to appeal to two very different groups of people. They're vastly different phones, and I think we're going to see quite the debate as to which phone really is better. Obviously, there's a lot to go over here, so I won't waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it and see how these phones stack up. First off, let's talk price. The Pixel 4a retails for $349, while the iPhone SE starts at $399. But actually, to make this a more fair comparison, we need to take things a step further. The 4a has one configuration option, 128 gigabytes in matte black, and that's what you get for the $349 price tag. The iPhone SE starts at 64 gigabytes. That's the $399 one, but for 128 gigabytes, like you would get on the Pixel, you'll actually be paying $449. And if you want to get an SE with 256 gigabytes of storage, you can do that too for $549. Sure, the iPhone SE does come in a few more colors, which some people might like, though I'm not sure that's really an advantage. The important thing really to take into consideration is just that while most people are comparing the $349 Pixel 4a to the $399 iPhone SE, you likely should be comparing it to the $449 iPhone SE instead. And in doing so, suddenly the iPhone is even more expensive than it seemed originally when compared to the Pixel. Physically, I think it's pretty obvious that these two phones are very different, and this is really one of the biggest aspects of these phones that likely makes each of them appeal to different people. With their size, they're both fairly small phones by 2020 standards at least. The Pixel 4a is a 5.8-inch device, that's its screen size, but obviously with its fresh new redesign, minimal bezels, and corner-to-corner display, you're getting a pretty good screen-to-body ratio. The iPhone SE is technically a 4.7-inch phone. That's its screen size, but when you include the body and the housing, it actually measures closer to 5.5 inches corner to corner. You can see side by side that while the Pixel 4a is physically a little taller and maybe a little wider, it's still kind of close. It's just the screen size and bezels that make the SE seem so much smaller. The Pixel 4a stretches that display on all sides. It ditches the notch for a more modern looking corner camera cutout, and also has no noticeable bottom chin either. It's a very even border all around that maximizes the real estate. The iPhone SE is a phone that really has the same design as the original iPhone from like 2007, but more appropriately comes from the iPhone 6s. Up top, there's a big bezel that houses the speaker grill and the selfie camera, and across the bottom, obviously you have the home button still. Now in the hand, the Pixel feels really comfortable. I think it's a device that will appeal to a lot of folks who want a decent sized screen in a reasonably sized body. With the iPhone SE, obviously it's an even easier to use phone one-handed. It's very easy to reach every corner, and while it may seem like this phone is just ridiculously dated at this point, besides its super small form factor and compact screen, the thing people like about this phone really is just the classic home button with Touch ID. There are folks out there that like the physical button, they like the fingerprint placement, they like that classic iPhone design, and they like that even smaller screen size too. So while 2020 standards might classify the SE as a super outdated looking phone, it is still something that appeals to some people. Now let's actually just quickly touch on the fingerprint scanners real quick too. Obviously the iPhone SE has its classic Touch ID in the home button, but the Pixel 4a has a fingerprint sensor as well located around back. And all in all, I think both sensors are very fast. The thing that's different is mostly just the animations and getting to the home screen. Neither phone has any face unlock either, so this this is the only biometric option you have with these devices. Obviously, the other big physical difference you'll notice with these two phones are the materials. The Pixel 4a is an all-plastic device with a matte finish, while the SE is the classic glass and aluminum that Apple has had on all of their phones, even their flagship devices. Yes, the SE looks and feels much more premium, that should come as no surprise, but the Pixel 4a doesn't feel cheap at all. And in fact, I'm a pretty big fan of this material on the phone. It's also going to be more durable in the event of a drop, which could be a plus, but the nicer build on the iPhone also yields a few little extras. The iPhone SE supports wireless charging, which the 4a does not, and the iPhone SE is also IP67 water and dust resistant as well, while the Pixel 4a has no water resistance rating at all. So while yes, the iPhone SE does have a few advantages when it comes to the build, you'll need to decide if any of those things are really important to you. Now, one thing the Pixel 4a has that the iPhone SE does not is a headphone jack, so that might be something of value to you. And as far as the out loud listening experience, both phones actually have dual speaker setups with a single speaker down below and an additional speaker in the earpiece. Personally, I do think the iPhone SE sounds a little better with the out loud listening experience, but here are a couple of samples so you can get an idea and decide for yourself. So we already went over the design and size, but let's talk about the display technology with these two phones because there are some huge differences here too. The Pixel 4a's 5.8-inch screen is an OLED display with a resolution of 2340 by 1080, packing in around 443 pixels per inch. The 4.7-inch screen on the iPhone SE is their Retina IPS LCD panel at a resolution of 1334 by 750 with about 326 pixels per inch. Now here's the deal, no matter how you look at it, the Pixel 4a's display is just inherently better. With it being OLED, you get brighter, more saturated colors, deeper blacks, and a viewing experience that looks more pleasing versus LCD. With the resolution, the 4a at full 1080p offers significantly more detail and clarity, no matter what you're viewing. And even though the screen size itself is bigger, you're actually still cramming in more pixels per inch. And like I said already, with the 4a, you're simply just maximizing the screen real estate on your device. There's no borders or bezels that distract from the viewing experience. That might be more subjective, I suppose, but objectively, the 4a's display is quite a bit better than the iPhone SE's. And I personally do think that most average consumers would be able to tell that if they held these phones up side by side. Now, that's not to say that the iPhone SE's display is bad. It's totally fine. We've had it for a while, and for most people, it's going to be good enough. But if you care even a little bit about screen quality, the choice is very clear in my opinion. Okay, so let's talk about specs and performance, since I think that's what a lot of people are curious about. First off, inside these phones, we're dealing with two very different sets of internals. The Pixel 4a packs the Snapdragon 730G processor, which is sort of an upper mid-range chipset that's about a year and a half old now, paired with the Adreno 618 GPU and 6 GB of RAM. The 2020 iPhone SE packs Apple's newest A13 Bionic chipset, and that's the same processor found in their $1,000 iPhone 11 Pro devices, but just 3 GB of RAM. Obviously, we're making the classic Android versus iOS comparison, which isn't exactly a true one-to-one comparison because these OSs just run differently. The animations are different, the pages and tabs and settings and overall look and feel and user experience isn't always so comparable. But I will say this, I'd like to be a little more critical of performance on the Pixel 4a since this is Google's phone after all. They maybe don't have total control over the internal specs, but this is as close as we're going to get right now to a direct Google to Apple or Android to iOS comparison. With Apple, you guys know they control everything. They optimize everything, the hardware, the software, and I think you're still going to see the SE perform better overall simply due to all of that optimization, even with third-party apps and games from the App Store. But I don't think the Pixel 4a lags behind too terribly. It's still a really solid phone for everything you might want it to do. And looking on the Android side of things, it's well optimized too, and packing in 6 gigabytes of RAM also I think is plenty. Each OS on their own has its pros and cons. You have a customizability element with Android, more flexibility with a lot of stuff, while with iOS you have to be okay with being engulfed in Apple's ecosystems, but there are some advantages to that. And that's all just going to be a personal preference at the end of the day. Performance-wise, both phones are great, but I think the iPhone SE is going to be the snappier device, just strictly because of how Apple can optimize everything with their devices. And taking it one step further, while Google promises at least 2 or 3 more years of software updates, Apple supports devices that are now 5 years old and counting. So from a longevity standpoint, for support and updates, again, I think the iPhone has the advantage with Apple. A couple of other things I just want to mention before we get into the camera. As far as battery capacity, the Pixel 4a has a decent sized 3140 milliamp battery, while the iPhone SE has a fairly small 1828 milliamp battery. Now, capacity doesn't always tell the full story. There are other factors to consider here, like the Pixel 4a's larger screen size and differing specs and RAM that might draw out more power. But when it comes to just lasting the full day, actually, the more I've used the SE, the more I've noticed its battery life just isn't so good. I've had the Pixel 4a for only a couple of days now, but in my time using it so far, I found it to comfortably make it through the day now with 30% or more life left in it. The iPhone SE for me has had trouble making it to the end without a charge recently, so I do think that for most people, the Pixel 4a will have the better real-world battery usage. And by the way, with the Pixel 4a, Google includes an 18-watt USB-C fast charger in the box. While the iPhone SE supports fast charging, you do need to go out and buy that accessory separately. So overall, with battery life and charging, all of the points go towards the Pixel 4a. And I know while the iPhone SE does support wireless charging, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think that's much of a plus. Finally, let's talk cameras. Now, here's the deal. I am working on some more in-depth camera comparison videos right now to showcase the full range of shooting potential. But for this video, I just want to give you the basics and keep things more straightforward. The Pixel 4a has the one camera lens around back, a 12.2 megapixel f1.7 aperture lens that's paired with a single 18 megapixel f2.0 aperture selfie camera up front. The iPhone SE, as you guys know, also has a single lens setup with an older 12 megapixel f1.8 main lens around back and a 12 megapixel f1.8 selfie camera up front. As far as the capabilities, there's one big difference you guys should know right off the bat. The Pixel 4a offers its night sight, low light shooting mode, while the iPhone SE has no night mode or low light shooting mode at all, and that's a big bummer for me. On the other hand, the iPhone SE is actually going to be the better video taker with 4K 60 FPS shooting and smoother video stabilization versus the Pixel 4a, which comes in at 4K 30 FPS capabilities and EIS. Most of the other shooting modes are going to be the same, but let's get into a couple real-world comparisons. Now, when it comes to selfies, the iPhone SE I think still has much more detail in its shots, interestingly enough, but I do think the Pixel 4a's pictures still look good. It's a different approach with the lens though too. You can sort of see like the shape of my head for whatever reason is different and what all you can see on my face sort of differs. The iPhone has like a more wider, broader shot. With the rear lens, on the other hand, this is where things change. The Pixel 4a is the better picture taker for a couple of reasons. The lighting looks better, the detail is sharper, it's not as soft as the iPhone. And if there was any doubt in Google being crowned the king of picture taking, I think they retain that title even still with this 4A. That's the phone I'd choose to strictly take pictures with on the rear camera if I had the choice. But like I said, I will have a more in-depth camera comparison video coming soon, so we can dive a little deeper into some side-by-side shots. So here are my final thoughts. I think both of these phones are great, and it's awesome to see both companies offering more affordable devices that are also a bit smaller and more compact. A lot of people like that, but with these phones though, they each have their own pros and cons, and they're just going to appeal to different people. I think for a vast majority of folks, the general population, the 4A is probably the better option when it comes to price, value, design, the screen, and the camera, but the iPhone is going to appeal to folks who like the old school iPhone setup, who like a premium feel of glass and aluminum, and who just like iOS. You can't really go wrong with either, but for me, I think I'd go with the 4A. What do you guys think? Which phone do you prefer? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.